Hi guys, welcome to another video. This is a guide with the 3 major topics that you need to know and consider when building a character. And I'm hoping that after this guide, you're going to be able to pick any character and know exactly what you need to be able to build them perfectly. Let's get into it. First things first, you want to get your character and you want to have a look at their traces. I think that's the best place to start. This is going to tell you the kind of stats that your character scales on and what you need to look for in its relics or perhaps in the Lightcones so that you can really make sure that you're building it to the best possible way it can be. Because if a character scales on a certain stat, you want to try and exploit that and put as much into that one stat as you possibly can so that they can perform in whatever role they're doing as best as they can do. If we look at a character like Yanqing, so if we look here, we're seeing a few stats come up to us. So we're seeing it increases Yanqing's crit rate, it increases Yanqing's crit damage, and it deals ice damage equal to 280% of Yanqing's attack. Now, the important part of all of that is what the damage is getting scaled on. In this case, it's being scaled on Yanqing's attack. That tells us that attack is going to be an important stat that we need to build on Yanqing. And that's something that we need to make sure that when we're farming for relics, it might be a substat or even a main stat that we want to prioritize. But just because it says it on its ultimate doesn't necessarily mean it's the case for everything. You need to always check the skill as well as the talent, and even it's not a bad idea looking at the basic attack. If you look at all of these, everything is pointing to Yanqing's attack. This is going to tell me that this is probably the stat that we're going to need to build on Yanqing. But that isn't the case for every character. A character like Natasha, who focuses on healing, might scale on something a little bit different. Looking at this, we can see that it heals the allies for 10.3% of Natasha's max HP. So this is a bit different from Yanqing. For starters, we're not dealing any damage, we've got an entirely different role, and what we want to do here is pump Natasha full of full of HP, so that we can try and get as much healing as we can out of her. But again, let's not stop at the ultimate, let's check the skill. Restores a single ally for 7.8 of Natasha's max HP plus 143. Everything is saying to us max HP. So this is telling us exactly what we need to build. We need to focus more on HP when we're looking at a unit like Natasha. Going to a unit like March, we can see that looking at her ultimate, we're not seeing anything about defense, which is usually the thing that you would think to scale on. So let's have a look. So it deals ice damage equal to March's attack, and then hit enemies have a 50% base chance to be frozen. So a character like this is pointing in a couple directions. If we then have a look at the skill, it provides a shield equal to March's defense plus 475. Some of these numbers, by the way, will vary depending on what trace level you're at with your character, but the numbers aren't necessarily what's important, it's what we're scaling on that we're trying to find with this. So with a character like March, we've got a few different choices. We've got an ultimate that deals damage based on her attack. It has a 50% base chance to be frozen. Base chance is a stat that is affected by effect hit rate. And we also have a skill that goes off March 7th's defense. So, for a character like this, you've got to decide what you want her to do. You could build March, to be honest, in a couple of different ways. You could build her as a defense scaling unit where you focus mostly on her skill to provide shields. Or you could even think, you know what, I like the sound of this ultimate, and let's lean into that instead. And perhaps building a build that has a higher effect hit rate. That way, you can more consistently freeze enemies when you use her ultimate. It's just something to consider. Not every character is as linear as build this one stat. You might be able to be a little bit flexible and perhaps have a lot of defense pieces on your relics, and then maybe just have one effect hit main stat on the chest or the boots. I'm not sure which one it's on. And then that way, you're kind of covering a couple of bases, but it's okay to be flexible. Just try and figure out what you want them to do. Next, I want to talk about relics. And this will probably be quite a long topic because there is quite a lot to cover. When it comes to these relics, obviously the hat and the gloves, you'll notice, are always attack and HP. That's just the way it's set for these games. The main stat on these items will never fluctuate. The chest, however, and the boots will, as well as obviously the sphere and the rope. Each different subsection has a limited amount of main stats they can be. If you look at the chest, we can see crit damage here, HP, crit rate, effect hit rate, outgoing healing boost, crit rate, defense. There's an array of different main stats, that you can get. But if we look on boots, we can see attack percent, which is another one you can get on the chest. HP again, defense again. But we see here speed. Speed is a unique one for boots. And what you'll notice as well is as we go through, you won't see any for crit rate or effect hit rate or anything like that. So, knowing what stat you're looking for and knowing which piece that you can find them on is an important thing to grasp at first. Trying to figure out where you're going to be able to find something like a main stat like effect hit rate. We now know that we're going to get that on our chest. Same with things like crits and anything like that. Spheres will always have things like attack or HP and defense, but you'll also find that they can also have damage boosts as their main stat for every element in the game. This is a really, really crucial stat for any DPS character. So for instance, even though it's not the best example for my Yang Qing, I unfortunately haven't got a good ice damage boosting sphere for the set that I want it for. But if I were to get that, I would absolutely pick that over attack percent. Even though Yang Qing scales on attack percent and it's not the worst thing to build on him, I would definitely prioritize a particular elemental damage boost over the attack. For the rope, we have attack again as a main stat, including others like defense and HP, but we also have some different ones, break effect being one of them. This is a stat that affects the proc that happens when you break the enemy's shield based on the element that you broke it with. That might sound a bit confusing. You can check that if you're not sure what I'm talking about. If you go to character details and you go to the top here and you click on the hunt, it shows you the paths, and if you go to the left it also has combat types. What this is telling us is when we broke an enemy's weakness, depending on the element we used, it will have an effect on the enemy. So for ice, it will deal ice damage and freeze the target. For physical, and for a lot of them to be honest, it gives you a damage over time. But there are a couple, like Quantum and Imaginary, that are quite unique. These will delay the enemy actions, reduce their speed, or even inflict damage on them when it comes back round to their turn. So building break effect on certain characters can be really, really good. Another main stat that you can get on the rope, is energy regeneration rate. This is a really, really strong stat for any support units. I would highly recommend it on pretty much any harmony unit or even your healers. They can be really good on your abundance units as well. It's a very unique stat. There's not many ways to increase it. So using a cord is a really good method of doing that. So now that we know what kind of stats that we find on the different relics and in their different categories, what do you want to pick for certain roles? So for a DPS character, although Yangqing scales on attack and any attack is welcome, for instance for boots, I would probably recommend building something like attack. For their chest, having a crit, either crit rate or crit damage, depending on the character and what you think you need more of, is an essential thing to do in my opinion. Although, obviously, if you have more attack on Yangqing, he will consistently deal more damage. You really can't ignore crit as a stat. It's really, really important. It will really push your damage boundaries into those higher numbers, and there's nothing more satisfying than getting a big crit. What can I say? I mean, that's it. That's what we're here for. We want those big numbers. If we were looking at other characters, for instance, the preservation main character, obviously they scale on defense, and because they don't need crits, that they're not looking to push those big numbers, they're just here to support our team, then I'm going to look at the stat that they scale on. So for the main character, obviously defense is the one that we're going to use there. For Natasha, we've got outgoing healing boost. That could also be HP, and arguably it might even be better to be HP. For other characters, effect hit rate could be perhaps more important. To be honest, it's a bit wasted on a character like Asta, but a character like Welt, that's a really, really good stat to have. And touching on what I said earlier, that would be something that you could even consider for a character like March, where her ultimate has the potential to freeze. This will allow you to more consistently freeze. It's just something to look for when you're going through your traces for a character. Have they got a base chance of inflicting a debuff on the enemy? And if that is the case, it might just be something to consider building effect hit rate for. Looking at boots, like I said earlier, I think attack percent is a really good main stat for most DPS characters, to be honest. They're usually quite fast as it is, so building more speed isn't a bad thing at all, but I think you get more out of building more attack on them. Seeing as we're not building it on the chest anyway, we usually go for a crit number on that. I think having more attack on the boots is a good way to go. But for a character like Asta and any harmony character or healing character, like I said earlier, I think speed is 100% the pick. And then obviously any other characters, like for instance Natasha or the preservation MC or a character like March, you just go for that stat that they scale on most. So the last real important thing, other than the fact that I'm just going to tell you now, make sure your characters are at the highest level they can be. I wouldn't recommend building every character you have in your roster. Pick I would say definitely pick 4 that you would like to focus on. And, you know, if you change your mind going through, don't panic, because you will need more than 4 eventually. 8 is, you know, the least amount of characters you're going to at some point need when you hit the end game content, because you begin doing you begin having fights where you will do one fight with one set of 4 characters, and then you'll do another fight with another set of 4 characters. So obviously, you know, you are going to need a little bit of a roster to make sure that you can clear everything in the game, but I would definitely focus on just having perhaps 4 at the beginning, and then maybe find a few others as you progress on. What I would, you know, and what I'm trying to say here is just make sure that they are leveled up the max that they can be. Your traces as well, they might just seem like little damage boosts, but they all add up in the end, and definitely important to go on to. So other than those things, the last thing to really talk about are Lightcones. This is it's a tricky thing for me to just suggest to you, you know, various Lightcones, because more and more will be coming out. But I'm going to point out a few stats that I think are really, really good to watch out for. And I want to point out a couple of other things just so you're aware. Just looking here, on my sealer, we've got a 5-star Lightcone. If you do have 5-star Lightcones, if you're lucky enough that you've pulled them, or you could argue unlucky enough, or you've picked up this one, for instance, from the simulated universe, these are really, really good. Not necessarily just for their effects. Usually their effects are very powerful, but what they actually bring to the table that other Lightcones don't, or the lower star Lightcones don't have, is that they actually have better main stats, and that can be really, really important. So I would suggest if you get any 5-star ones, I would consider building those up. Other than that, what kind of stats are we looking for? So if we're looking at, let me just organize this in terms of, oh, it won't let me. Well, let's just go in terms of rarity then. So if we're looking at this for a DPS kind of unit, oh, okay. Having things like crit rate is obviously very, very good. And again, kind of going a little bit back onto the relics, you are looking for the stats that they scale on. So for this one, again, when the wearer defeats an enemy, their attack is increased. That's great. We know that characters like Sele and characters like Yongqing, they all scale on attack. This is just bonus damage for yourself. So for hunt units, any kind of character you want to consider as your DPS, crit rate, crit damage, attack, and also something else to consider is raw damage as a stat. This, you could even argue, is better than the stat that they may even scale on, like attack. So if we look at this, upon entering the battle, it increases the wearer's speed by 8%. Okay, that's great. And damage by 12. So that is a flat damage increase of 12%. That's a really good stat to improve. So I think it's just something to consider. If you're umming and ahhing between the two, I would perhaps consider going for the damage stat as opposed to just maybe a raw attack stat or something like that. So now looking for other units, more like supporting units that aren't here just to deal damage. They're here to enable the character that you're doing the damage with. Really good stats to look for are things that regenerate your energy. I think that's a really important thing. And also, you want to look for stats that will increase your turn speed. So looking here, when the wearer uses their ultimate, all allies and actions advance forward by 16%. That's really, really, really strong. And I think that's a really good stat to look for. I'm being generic and I'm not being specific with the Lightcones I'm talking about here, because I want you to be able to take this knowledge and use it even when new ones have come out. So I could just tell you to build dance, 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 and you know what? I'm going to tell you to build dance, dance, dance if you've got it. I think it's a really good Lightcone. But in the future, there could be ones that are even better than this, and you just might not be sure, you know, if it's just come out, is it worth building? And I think if it has advanced forward on it, it's absolutely something to consider building. Outside of those things, I think just look for stats that you know you've already built on your relics, or that you see are stats that your character uses a lot in their traces, and just look for those and just try and find one that's got the best fit. This one, for instance, increases break effect, so if I was having a character that I was leaning into that a bit more, this would be something I'd perhaps consider. It's just going to increase that number even higher on top of your relics, and perhaps if your traces increases the stat as well. For instance, my preservation main character has a Lightcone that's increasing their defense. It was a stat that we saw earlier was an important stat for their kit, and we're just giving more of it. So while I know a lot of these things that I've covered today are quite, you know, you might take them for granted, but what I'm trying to do is give you the ability to be able to look at a character without, you know, watching a guide on how to build them or anything like that. Just see a character and know what they need, and just to be able to experiment yourself and to have a go at building characters yourself. It's a key part of this game. How, you know, you build your character is how you get your damage. It's how you beat the enemies and everything like that. It's a big aspect to this game, and it's a fun one as well. If you get into it and you start messing around with other numbers, like I said, building an effect hit rate on March, it's not something that most people would probably suggest for you to do, and you know what, that might be for good reason, but it's not a wasted stat on her. It's a perfectly valid stat that you can build on her and really abuse. You can just be freezing enemies consistently and constantly, and that sounds pretty good. I just think it's, you know, it's a good knowledge to have, and even though it's it might not always be the most meta option, have fun, experiment, see what you enjoy, and you know, you might actually find something that other people haven't even considered, and it could be actually really, really powerful for that character. So I hope this has helped in some way for people. And yeah, you know, just have a go. Let me know if you do find any interesting little combos with characters. Let me know in the comments. And like I've said already, I hope this helps. Have a fantastic rest of your day, guys. Peace out.